Number 1.
A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in Shugwamigan National Forest in northern Wisconsin, and after our experience, we did not plan to return unless we go with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the UP, but never to this area. We're not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section of the Northern Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail, like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We planned to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wosu, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forests. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted out bunched up pickup truck complete with Confederate bumper sticks. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed that they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we did not think anything of the encounter. Aside from those people, we did not encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead, and a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure that the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way and marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring and I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around in a giant filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled in our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day, but after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs, but that night there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure what time we drifted to sleep, but we woke up to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting 2 logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent hearing the noise again. Our old tent had a mesh window, but the backpacking tent we were using had no windows. We could only guess at what was making the noise outside our tent. We initially thought that an animal got at our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise was too distinct, and it did not sound like the rustling through food wrappers or camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we did not know what to do. I would have normally carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend, that is. The knocking continued, but we remained still as not to give away our location. For all we know, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence, with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch breaking, and voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices did not seem to be getting louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or decided to just leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and then put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word kill was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe and knife cuts where someone was chopping up at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew that we were getting closer to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw that there was blood smeared all over the windshield, and a squirrel carcass was impaled on the wiper blade. Hair and blood still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning off the car. We threw our gear into the trunk and sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to a gas station by the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip I took to the woods of northern Wisconsin.
Number 2.
My mum grew up in a small town, and she's had quite a few creepy encounters as a teen in the late 1970s. One night, her mother told her that she had to go and feed the cats, who lived in the outside sauna in the winter. She reluctantly went outside since it was such a bitterly cold winter that year. She would get halfway to the sauna when she would hear a man calling, "Help me," from the woods nearby her house. She got spooked and ran back to the house and tried to tell her mum that there was someone outside yelling for help. Her mum told her that it was just the wind and to go back outside to feed the cats. She went back out and got about halfway to the sauna when she heard a man call for her to help him. She was positive that it wasn't the wind, and this time made her mum come outside to listen. Her mum also heard the "help me" calling from the woods. She called for her husband to go and look in the woods to see what it was, since she didn't think it was a good idea for her daughter or herself to go and looking for this guy. My mum's dad went out into the woods to see who was in need of assistance, and was stunned to find a man in a long winter coat standing in the woods near the house. When the man in the coat saw my grandpa, he ran towards a dirt road and got into a car that sped away quickly. I don't know what the man in the coat intended, but I'm certain my family do not want to see him again.
Number 3.
I used to think that the deadliest thing in the woods were rattlesnakes and possibly a panther. Now, I know better. I'm going to apologize in advance for the length and the backstory, and I feel that otherwise there would be questions. The story took place this past summer in the southern United States. The woman that I work for is stupid rich. Her family are proper southern blue bloods with money that reaches back to the pre-slavery days. Where I actually work is an old plantation house that sits on 15,000 acres, straddling 2 state lines and bordered by large state parks on 2 sides. a large chunk of mostly untamed land. Horses are my boss's passion, no other way to say it. She has numerous amounts of horses and devotes 100 acres to the beasts, complete with large expensive barns and all the works. A way that she earns a decent amount of money is offering hunting packages or trail rides to people. People can pay to come deer hunt on the property, quail hunt and fox hunting as well. All 3 animals she keeps on site, permits for everything, so she can control the population on hand. It's quite a mind-boggling operation and might sound strange at first. Anyway, I'm a college-aged female, and I got involved in all of this when I used to compete in horse shows, and met my current boss, who later became my riding coach. I help assist with various activities that I won't bore you with. One of said activities is on-off hunting weekend to check riding trails for fallen branches, knocked over jumps, etc. They're also used to check the large deer fence border, the kind that you see on the side of highways, that are 12 feet high with barbed wire on top. We check for holes and make sure all of the gates are padlocked and undisturbed. My boss is extremely paranoid of people with nefarious intentions. On the afternoon that the event happened, I was riding with one of my co-workers, Brandon, and we were checking the fence line that bordered the state park. It was around 7 AM when we left out, and it would take a large chunk of the day to ride the L-shaped border. The entire property is like a large rectangle. It's late summer, so fairly hot, even early in the morning, but still wonderful weather with bright green foliage. We kept at a long, brisk pace, but not hurried as we caught up with the gossip and just relaxed. Around 11 AM, we came to the back of the edge of the property, where there is a gate complete with padlock. Checking it, we found nothing out of the order and continued on our way. The next landmark is an old tobacco barn that hasn't been used in about 50 years. We chose this place to eat a quick lunch and feed the horses their snack as well. After we hitched the horses, and I fed mine her obligatory peanut butter sandwich, we walked up to check out the barn. On the backside of the barn, in a clearing, is a small camping trail, the kind that is red and white and pulled behind a truck. As I was idly looking at it, I thought I saw a flash of something shiny on the roof of the camper. I called Brandon's attention to it, and we decided to walk over. When we walked into the small clearing that the trailer stood, it became clear to us that something was going on. The first thing that I noticed was the fire. It was mostly burnt down log and ash, but still fairly recent. There were also boot tracks everywhere. Almost everyone that works there wears riding boots, which leave a cowboy boot looking print, while these treads looked like work boots. Litter and cigarette butts littered the area as well. At this point we were starting to freak out, as it slowly became clear to us that maybe someone is here that shouldn't be. We carry walkies at work, but both of us left ours with the horses. I see a strange and indescribable look cross Brandon's face, perhaps terrified determination, and he looks across at me. We should go inside. Something's wrong here. What I wanted to say was, fuck no, that's exactly why we need to leave. But instead, I just nod. Brandon nods back and flings the door open, getting up the small metal steps in one bound. I close on his heels. The smell hit us first, like garbage rotting in the sun or curdled milk, making me gag. It was dark inside the trailer, curtains and blankets covering every window, and I unthinkingly tug a blanket off the small window next to the door. Now, with the light we could see inside, trash covered the floor. We were standing at the door still in the kitchen of the camper, and the bedroom was on the far side to the left. A curtain was drawn closed. Brandon called out, "Hello?" loudly, and cleared his throat. We both listened with cocked heads, straining to catch movements, but heard nothing. "Stay close," Brandon said, and moved gingerly through the kitchen where he checked the bathroom and bedroom. No one. The bedroom held more evidence of recent living, sleeping bag, and food. The most chilling thing of all lay on the kitchen table. At first glance, it looks like a photo album. However, it was a plain black scrapbook with pictures of children inside. Strange pictures, not exactly pornographic, like pictures of children out of magazines, like child models you see advertising clothing. But all of these kids were cut out and glued in this book with scrawled writing squeezed into the margins. Brandon was coming out of the bathroom and I held it up to him. "We need to go." He then held up a rusty, blood-covered knife with a serrated blade, perhaps a combat knife. It was the size of a bowie knife. We skipped quickly out of the camper and made our way back to the barn. As we reached the halfway point, however, a voice roared out from behind us. "Hey!" He sounded furious, rageful. We both turned to see a man in a plaid shirt standing in the clearing and looking at us. He was like 70 feet from us at that point, but we both instantly took off to the barn and back to the horses. I have no idea if he chased us. We hit the horses and spurred them out of there. The story pretty much ends here. We went back to the big house and got my boss. By the time we came back, the man and the book were gone, leaving the knife and everything else behind. That was honestly the most terrified I've ever been. I shook for hours after it happened and even threw up when we were far enough away. Who knew what he would have done if we had still been in the camper or if he had caught us? I still have nightmares about it.
Number 4.
This actually happened to my best friend and I 6 years ago, and to this day it sends chills up my spine. In our early teen years, Will and I were more than a little adventurous. Both of our mothers were teachers at our school, and part of being a teacher's kid is that after the final bell rings on your last day, it's still not summer. You can look forward to one more week of waking up early so you can help your parents clean their classrooms and pack up textbooks. It's always boring, and most of the days our mothers were in meetings, so we just ran around an empty school. I remember vividly that it was a Friday, the last day before we could experience our summertime freedom, and Will's oldest sister, Stephanie, had also come to help pack her mum's classroom. The three of us had been playing manhunt while our mums were in meetings. Will told us that he wanted a smoke. We were 15 and Stephanie was 17, but they'd been smoking for a few years. I'm the daughter of a lifetime smoker, so I opted out. We walked to the adjacent middle-class football field, and then past an open fence and into a wooded clearing that was a usual hangout for kids skipping class. I need to interject the story to tell you that I'm from Florida, and rural Florida is nothing like the postcards of tan beauties and flamingo skyscrapers. My hometown exists only because someone developed a way to make semi-livable land out of a swamp. So, Will, Stephanie and I sat on the outskirts of this clearing as they smoked, until we decided it'd be fun to go for a walk in the woods. Will swore that there was a river that you could swim in. We walked for about 15 minutes, and that's when I realized we hadn't considered finding our way back. Most of rural Florida looks the same, oak trees with Spanish moss and spine needles. None of us thought about leaving a trail. I took my phone to call my mother, but there was no signal. I suggested that we go back, but we hadn't told anyone where we were, and it was getting to that mid-afternoon thunderstorm time. They agreed we should turn around, and we thought we had. It turns out Stephanie has no sense of direction, and she led us deeper into the forest. We were walking for about 30 minutes when we realized how lost we were. Nothing looked familiar, but everything did. The same flora and fauna we'd seen when we entered surrounded us, and I quickly formed a plan. I thought if we could find another open space, we could signal for help, or maybe get a signal. We walked for 30 minutes before we saw a hunting tree stand, which was more than odd. By this time, I knew that we had crossed over into the national park behind our school, and hunting was strictly forbidden. More walking, less talking. We were dehydrated, hungry, and bleeding from going straight through a field of palmettos. Will was the first one to see the cages, at least 20 of them. Huge metal cages with hatches propped open by sticks. Stephanie suggested it was for catching wild boars, but none of us had ever seen or heard of boars around town. Some of the cages had dried blood around them, and one looked as though it had been kicked hard from the inside. The entire time we were lost, Will had been trying to call his dad. No signal, so no luck. My flip-flops broke, so I was now barefoot and bleeding pretty badly from the palmettos. We needed to take a break, and I sat on a log while Will went around, holding his Nokia Raz up in the air, trying to get a signal. He left our sight for maybe 10 minutes when I heard him scream. Stephanie and I sprinted towards the direction of the scream, but froze when we saw two men. One was about 60 years old, with white blonde hair that hung down to his shoulders and a weather-beaten face. He was covered in dirt, and the denim shirt he was wearing was shredded to bits. The other was about 20 and looked as though he had just left his job at a cubicle, a button-down white shirt and nice pants. Neither were wearing shoes, and they were both crouching. These two men were squatting and looking directly at us, their arms limp and dangling, close-lipped, smiling. They stayed like that. It felt like an hour passed before my body's fight or flight kicked in, and I guess mine chose fight. I crouched too and stared them down. After what I'd guess was maybe 3 minutes, the older man stood up and ran into the woods, and the younger one followed. Will re-emerged from the woods not long after this, hysterical. He was crying hard and had peed himself. He asked me repeatedly why we hadn't come when he screamed, and I tried to explain to him that we hadn't because of the two men. And when he finally seemed to understand what I was saying, he stopped crying and went silent. We walked for another 20 minutes in dead silence when I saw pavement. We had finally run into civilization, a bike trail that runs through the national park to be exact. I had never been so excited to see asphalt. We called our parents, and we sat on the ground, and we cried together. It had only been 4 hours, but it had felt like days. My mother bought me a huge jug of water and yelled at me for running into the woods, but she was very relieved I was okay. I told her about the two men, and she thought that warranted telling the cops. So I wrote my statement, and that was the end. I never heard anything from the cops. About 2 weeks later, Will was over at my house playing video games when he brought up the subject of the woods. Through bites of pizza, he told me that he hadn't seen the two men. When he was searching for a signal, he heard pine needles being crunched underfoot, and it sounded as if something was bounding at him. So he did. He didn't even look behind him, just hid behind a fallen tree. The noise stopped, and he stood up to come back to us when he saw a woman crouching about 15 feet from him. She had dried blood on her hair and all over her shirt. That's when Will screamed, and she stared at him until she turned into the woods and ran. To this day, I don't think anyone's ever found him, and I refuse to step foot into the park again.
Number 5.
When I was a junior in college, my friend invited me to attend a ballet with her and a teenage girl she knew from back home. The girl was part of an educational advancement program that had placed her in a nearby high school and provided a free room and board in a group home with other students. All of her housemates had gone home for the fall break, so my friend thought it would be nice to take her out for a girls' night out from that big empty house with only her program advisor for company. It was about midnight when we got back from ballet. Since we were in possession of a 16-year-old overdue for her curfew, it seemed important to get her home as quickly as possible. The girl's house was fairly close to a student shuttle stop on the far end of campus, so we figured we'd walk her home before doubling back. While moving up a path that leads into town, we realized her house backed up to the Arboretum on the edge of the campus. Rather than walk all the way around, we decided to cross the Arboretum, and we didn't have flashlights, but my friend's iPhone flash could serve in a pinch, and the stretch of woods was sandwiched between the brightly lit windows of our dorms and those of the houses across the way. Several minutes into our hike, we lost sight of the footpath and the dorms. It was much darker now, and my friend was less certain that we were going the right way, so we paused to check our location. As we were all huddled, motionless around my friend's phone, we heard a twig crack behind us. We turned around to find a young woman, presumably a student, standing a few yards away. Her hoodie was pulled over her head, obscuring most of her face. She seemed enormous, but given that I'm 5'3" and was flanked by 2 5-foot ballet dancers, the threshold for enormity was low. She was silent for a moment, and then asked where we were going. "We're heading into town," my friend answered. "Where are you going?" "What do you need in town?" "We're taking her home," my friend pointed to the teenage girl. "Where does she live?" "Not too far. Where are you going?" "Do you know how to get there?" She started to walk closer to us, The teenage girl grabbed a fistful of my coat and inched closer to me. "Yeah, we figured it out. Are you going towards campus or into town?" "Which way is it?" "Her house." She was now within a few feet away. Her approach had slowed, but not yet stopped. My friend quickly blurted out, "Just this way. Good night." She was bluffing, but any direction from this student seemed like the right direction, so we went along. The plan was a failure. Within seconds, I could hear her crunching the leaves just behind us. She was following close enough to touch me, and I sped up, certain I was about to get a knife in my spine if I didn't get away. When my friend saw me rushing, she turned back to see the student following us. She grabbed the teenager's hand, and the three of us began to run. We never turned back, so I'm not sure how long the student followed. Eventually we figured out we were running the right way when the teenager yelled out, "That's it," and led us to a driveway where we could huff and puff ourselves back to normal under a garage-mounted floodlight. The girl's program advisor was home, waiting up for her missing ward, and made us each a cup of tea while we waited for the campus police to drive out and escort me and my friend back to our dorm. Once safely in the backseat of a college security vehicle, we told the officer why we'd wanted a ride instead of walking back. He said that this was the third time this semester that they had picked up students running scared from the woods after encountering a strange girl in a hoodie. They had dispatched officers to look into it before, but they never found anyone. He figured it was a student on a stroll from the dorms, and we had nothing to worry about. As soon as we got out of the car, my friend got a text from the teenager. She was certain she had seen the student outside her window, but when the program advisor went out to investigate, no one was there. I never found out what happened, but I really hope that the creepy girl in the woods is not the same student whose body was found out there a year later. I hope she had nothing to do with that at all. Yo guys, what's going on? It's the Grim Reader here. Well, another video. It's 6 days since the last time I uploaded. Can I just take this opportunity and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything that I've done. I truly and sincerely apologize for not uploading frequently. And I don't need to apologize because I don't ever apologize. But why do I feel like I'm talking to someone on the phone on these outros? Anyway, thank you for listening to this video. Stay tuned for the next one. And if you want to listen to other videos of mine with similar stories, you can always go in the description, click on the links, go on the playlist, go on the main page of my YouTube channel, and you'll find a ton of sick videos with sick stories. Yeah, you're welcome. Nah, I'm kidding. Thank you, and see you next time.